I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, neighbors rattled near San Diego International. The debate over flight plan changes.
The possible hack of the CIA director's personal email account comes during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm Peggy Pico with cybersecurity tips for your home and work. And Solana Beach may be the first city in the county to ban styrofoam and other polystyrene food containers. What else your takeout containers could be made of.
Hello!
The sounds of inspiration, how a San Diego exhibit explores the intersection of art and music. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Unreasonable rate hikes. California Senator Dianne Feinstein is pushing a bill that would give the federal government the power to block health insurance rate increases. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg has the details.
Regulators in California and 14 other states in red lack the authority to block excessive increases in health insurance premiums. Feinstein's bill would give the HHS secretary the authority to do so in those states. Carmen Balber directs the nonprofit Consumer Watchdog. She says homeowners and car insurance premiums are regulated in California.
There's no logical argument for why health insurance companies shouldn't simply be required to make the same justifications and get the thumbs up from a regulator before they raise insurance rates.
Just last week in California, Aetna raised premiums an average of 27% on small business health plans. California's insurance commissioner called the increase unjustified, but he was powerless to stop it. Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
Utility companies say they have collected enough money from ratepayers to cover the cost of decommissioning the San Onofre plant in the North County, but a nuclear watchdog says SDG&E should not stop charging the decommissioning fee next year. The Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility says the fund is likely to run out before government finds a permanent storage site for nuclear waste. SDG&E plans to stop charging ratepayers the decommissioning fee next year. Rallying for higher wages, students and faculty at San Diego State getting the word out during a noontime picket outside the campus library. Faculty members at the 23 CSU campuses, including San Marcos, are voting this week on whether or not to strike. They want a 5% raise in pay. After the after the CSU received an extra $97 million in state funding. The university is offering raises of 2%. The union says no dates have been set for a possible walkout. The earliest one would happen is January. Paramedics rushed one person to the hospital this afternoon following an officer-involved shooting in the Gaslamp Quarter downtown. The investigation had streets shut down near the intersection of 6th Avenue and F Street. Officers say someone opened fire around 2 this afternoon. Police are not identifying the person shot and no word on what led to the shooting. Some changes before takeoff. San Diego Airport Authority is telling the FAA they would like to see changes to their plan to modify flight paths. KPBS reporter Steve Walsh explains why neighbors are worried.
The airport wants to negotiate changes to the Federal Aviation Administration plan to tighten airspace around San Diego, which has so many Point Loma residents worried.
We want to see if there are incremental changes that we can make. So can we work with the FAA to see if, as an example, can we fly further out into the ocean before they make the turn? There's some things that we can try and sit down with the FAA to see.
The airport wants the FAA to keep a marker that discourages planes from flying over Point Loma as they bank to fly east. To judge the impact of the noise, the airport also wants the FAA to use a California standard, which starts earlier in the evening at 7 o'clock. They also want a 180-day period to judge the impact of any change. The two sides have not sat down since the public comment period closed for the Southern California Metroplex earlier in the month. The FAA has set a target to implement changes of next year. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
Stinging eyes and nausea, just some of the complaints from dozens of kids and teachers who got sick after a bleach spill in Santee. It happened this morning at the YMCA, and the fumes hit Rio Seco Elementary. Medics checked 77 students, 4 staffers at the scene. They were later treated for minor chemical exposure. Classes resumed after authorities found no traces of a public risk. Starting today, a complete makeover for one of the worst streets in San Diego. A street in Allied Gardens was labeled one of the worst in the city based on a 2011 assessment of all road conditions. Now it has a new smooth surface thanks to city crews. The mayor says fixing up streets is his highest priority.
This is where our dollars should be going, to make sure that streets are smooth, to make sure that you have a road you can ride your bike on, you can drive your car on, no matter where you live in the city.
But Mayor Faulkner says he won't support a potential ballot measure that would collect more money for infrastructure repairs. The CHP says distracted driving is still the #1 cause of death among California teenagers between the ages of 16 and 19. A San Diego mother who lost her son to a car crash spoke during a safe driving event for teenagers in Lakeside. Martha Tesmer's son was a star high school football player just 2 days away from starting his senior year, but he never got to wear his letterman's jacket after horsing around in a car with friends without a seatbelt.
You see, when they hit that tree so hard they bounced off the tree. And when the back door flew open, those 3 football players in the back seat who had chosen to not put their seatbelts on, well, they were all 3 ejected. And when my son Donovan hit the ground, he lost his life instantly.
Research shows emotional appeal affects teens' behavior much more than graphic gore. A program called Impact Teen Drivers connects them using real-life stories to help change attitudes. It's already reached more than 2 million students nationwide. Changes may be on the way for breast cancer screenings following new guidelines from one of the most influential groups in the treatment debate. We're talking about the American Cancer Society. They now say annual screening should start at age 45 instead of 40. Those screenings should switch to every other year starting at age 55. It's not a one-size-fits-all recommendation.
Using that information in conjunction with her values and preferences for her own care, a woman and her clinician should be able to come up with a good screening schedule for that individual patient.
The update also drops a recommendation for routine physical breast exams by doctors. The federal government is investigating a reported hacking incident involving the CIA director's personal email account. The alleged hacker also claims to have broken into the email account of the head of Homeland Security. But you don't need a high-profile job to be at risk. Peggy Pico explains how to boost your cybersecurity at work and at home.
October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Joining me with what's being done about the dangers Internet users face is my guest, Darren Anderson, with the California Cybersecurity Task Force and founder and president of CyberTech, a San Diego coalition of nearly 50 cybersecurity firms. And Darren, a teenager has claimed to have hacked into the email account of the head of CIA. How big of a threat, then, is a cyber attack to, say, the average person?
Well, some people would argue that everybody's been hacked. So in that sense, we're all at risk or we've all already been hacked.
How common are teenage hackers? Is that a growing thing that teenagers are doing?
It's probably growing, but in some ways the roots of hacking starts with teenagers, those that are sitting home bored and they started playing on their computers, and that sort of led initially to like mischief, like what can I break into? So it's kind of, in a way, like in the roots.
Now, is there any idea on how this teen could have hacked into these elite sites?
Assuming that it is a teen, and that's something that has been attributed to that because they called the Washington Post and said, I'm a teen and I hacked into this computer.
And they posted quite a bit of details.
Yes, so clearly we know that the account was hacked. And what happened is a social engineering attack where they were able to obtain the director's telephone number. They then use that to reverse and get some credit card information, enough to call up the ISP provider and get the credentials for the director's personal email account. Once they had that, they were then in, as they say, and able to look at all the documents that were contained and the emails contained in that email.
That's one way to do it, people trying to glean information from people who shouldn't give them to them. But most of us remember the massive data breach at Target back in 2013. How big of a problem is cybersecurity for American businesses?
It's becoming an increase. It's been a big issue for at least 10 years, if not more. We've had a number of adversaries with different political and economic motivations across the world that have been breaking into our computers, and especially business computers, for some period of time. Very significant, $1 trillion problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, per incident, it's a few $1 million per incident, and then in Target's case, it costs them a lot of money.
Yeah, so far we've calculated about $260 million in brand and sort of damage, if you will, to Target. They'll probably come through fine. A lot of times, believe it or not, the companies and the stock price come through even stronger, but it definitely is a setback for the reputation and for the customers as well.
Now, getting back to personal privacy protection, these credit card chips that are in credit cards that a lot of us have now, what are they designed to do and how effective are they?
Well, what it does is it provides an additional form of identification. It links that credit card to somebody specific, and you read them in a machine in real time, and it gives that second form of authentication.
So do you think they're more protective,
or
do you think it's false security?
No, I think it's better. I think the Europeans have been using that system for well over 10 years. It's served them well. It's better than what we have now. And with security, it's always what I call half the distance to the wall. You're trying to get a little bit better and a little bit more secure, every day.
Well, speaking of which, what are some of your best ways at home and at work to protect your online or cybersecurity?
Well, the first thing you can do is just what I call basic cyber hygiene. Make sure that you're changing your passwords on a regular basis. Have a smart password, something that is hard for other people to crack. It could be a long sentence. It doesn't have to be a tricky, password that has all sorts of funky characters. Use a long phrase, something that allows you to remember it and also to be something that somebody is unlikely to guess. Don't use things like your mother's maiden name, date of birth. Those are all things that hackers are aware of, and they're going to try to break into your account with that information.
So things we've heard before: change your passwords often, make sure you have a good password. Anything else?
Don't share your passwords. I would also say be aware. I call it, don't walk down a dark street in Paris. It's all about making sure that you're not creating a footprint for you to be vulnerable. So be smart. It's about making sure that you're not sharing your information when you shouldn't, your basic hygiene of passwords and so forth. So, again, it's like be aware of your surrounding and your cyber footprint.
Now, what should you do if your privacy has been compromised?
Well, there's a couple ways to go. You can actually call the local police department. They have procedures. Normally, they'll point you back towards the FTC. You'll file a case there. And actually, that case number will follow you with all your credit card vendors. It's a pretty well-established procedure now.
All right, Darren Anderson, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Is it a boy or girl? A fun guessing game on tap for SeaWorld's newest family member, the baby dolphin. Born last Sunday at the San Diego park, trainers say both mom and baby appear to be healthy. The calf weighs 40 pounds. Vets will figure out its gender over the next few weeks. Beyond Mystery Meat Tuesday, San Diego Unified is trying to raise the bar on school food. KPBS education reporter Matt Bowler has more on the ambitious goals for cafeterias.
Here's a crazy idea. How about school cafeterias actually cook food and then feed their children California-grown food? That's just what San Diego Unified's doing. Last year, San Diego Unified started California Thursdays at 20 schools. Every Thursday, those schools serve students fresh produce grown in California. Now, that program is in every district school, more than 220. Gary Patel, Director of Food and Nutrition Services for San Diego Unified, says buying local is not only better for students' health, it's better for the economy.
Buy as much local produce as we can to support our local economy. This is what it's all about, is supporting your neighborhood, supporting your community.
Superintendent Cindy Martin says that cooking fresh local food is a new way of thinking about school cafeterias.
And realize that you can do fresh food, it can be local, and can actually cost less money than the prepackaged processed foods that we typically were serving.
Now, with California Thursdays, in every school, Patel wants to make another big change.
And so we're in a movement to go to scratch cooking altogether. And this is our first real big steps.
San Diego Unified's goal is to have every student at every school eating fresh, scratch-cooked, California-grown food every day.
No more cardboard pizza around here.
Matt Buller, KPBS News.
Solar power is becoming a bigger source of energy in California. It's helping the state meet environmentally friendly renewable energy goals, but a new study shows many big solar farms are located on natural lands far from urban cores. Researchers say less than 15% of major solar developments in the state are in environmentally compatible areas. Changing the doggy bag as we know it, Solana Beach is one step closer to banning plastic foam containers typically used for leftover dishes from restaurants. Peggy Pico takes a closer look at the ban.
Solana Beach and Encinitas are the only two cities in San Diego County to ban plastic bags. Now Solana Beach may be the first to ban polystyrene, food containers, more commonly known by the brand name styrofoam. Joining me with the details is Solana Beach Council member Peter Zahn, who proposed the ordinance. And Peter, why do you want to ban these polystyrene or plastic foam containers?
Well, Peggy, first of all, the city of Solana Beach, we have environmental sustainability as a key strategic objective for our city. But also, these containers cause so much harm in terms of getting into the food supply, the oceans, the litter on our beaches, and the like, that the benefits just do not outweigh the costs.
The benefits of using them. Now, styrofoam and other polystyrene containers, they're not biodegradable. Are they recyclable?
Really, they are not recyclable except in very limited circumstances, which no one can achieve. And that is that these containers need to have virtually zero food contamination or food residue. So there are no equipment that can handle recycling these unless they're like crystal clear.
So what happens if you put them into your recycling bin?
Well, basically, they get packed up ultimately by the waste hauler with the regular refuse, unfortunately, and they often get shipped to China and other places.
What are some of the alternatives to styrofoam or polystyrene, which is the generic name?
Well, if you go into a lot of restaurants these days, and in fact in Solana Beach, out of the 62 restaurants there, all but 18 have switched out of these styrofoam, polystyrene materials. There's reinforced cardboard type materials. This one actually came from Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. And there are also a lot of plant-based alternatives now that are just as effective as polystyrene.
Kind of that cornstarch we've seen for
That's
a while.
right. There are several more coming on the market, but the existing ones are fine.
Now, who would this ordinance apply to if it passes?
So this will apply to food preparers, restaurants and grocery stores and the like, who make food in some way and package it into containers. Often you'll see with your takeout food in those clam lid containers that you'll take home. But for those 15 minutes that you have the benefit of, and you get it home into your fridge, it might stay overnight, then these will last hundreds of years after that in our landfills and elsewhere and getting into our oceans.
Now, what about the criticism that this ban or switching over will cost businesses money?
Well, our city staff looked into this, and in fact, we found some increased difference in cost between the polystyrene and the substitute materials, but they're really insignificant. And keep in mind, we now have 90 cities that have done this in the state of California, and there's very little evidence of any detrimental financial effect on the businesses.
So 90 cities in California, this would be the first in San Diego County.
That is right.
I see. Now, Solana Beach does have one waste company that processes styrofoam or polystyrene, but what's the issue with that waste production
Yeah,
plant?
so our commercial hauler, Edco, good company, but they really don't have the equipment. It's just very expensive and it's hard to put into effect. It can apply to the larger styrofoam containers that you might see, or materials that might come with TV sets and that kind of thing sometimes, but overall it is still not effective and just not cost effective for them to do it.
How effective is this container ban, do you think it would be if all the cities around you are still using styrofoam or polystyrene containers?
Well, that's a great question. We know that our effect will be somewhat limited, but we also know that as others consider bans of this type, they'll look to our example and they will take away some real positive benefits. We're going to see some immediate great effects in terms of the amount of litter on our beaches, and of course there are the health benefits as well. They're harder to quantify, but absolutely real.
Well, the ordinance needs approval in its second reading. The first one, it was approved. Are you confident it's going to pass?
I'm pretty confident. We passed it 4-1 in the vote last Wednesday, and in this case, I don't see any reason that any of us would change our minds. It's possible it could happen, but it's a rare event for it too. So I'm very confident. All
right. Well, we'll be following the story at kpbs.org. Solana Beach Council Member Peter Zahn, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bottoms up. Ballast Point is to become the first San Diego brewery on Wall Street. Experts say this move may allow the brewery to explore the international market and introduce the craft beer to a wider audience. Its initial public offering is worth nearly $175 million. The brewery says it will issue up to 20 million shares of stock. Control of the company remains with founder Jack White and family members.
We must run this place as it should be run.
Who has an under-butler these days?
I suppose you've settled into the routine by this time.
I think so.
Maintaining a stiff upper lip for the final season of Downton Abbey. The British drama was a hit for PBS. The show followed the joys and tragedies of the Crawley family. The 5th season was viewed by more than 25 million people. Downton Abbey starts January 3rd. The show's finale is set for the first weekend of March. Of course, you can see it right here on KPBS. It may be one of the largest exhibits in the history of the San Diego Museum of Art. It explores the intersection of art and music. KPBS culture reporter Angela Carone explains why size mattered for this multimedia experience.
This is the first artwork you see in the San Diego Museum of Art's new Art of Music exhibit. It's called Beethoven's Trumpet with Ear. Speak into the trumpet.
Hello!
And suddenly, Beethoven. The piece is by acclaimed artist John Baldessari, and it's a fitting start to an exhibition that looks at the role of music in art. There are over 200 pieces in the show, and it spans history and cultures.
This is a music box by Robert Rauschenberg. So it's a sculpture, but it's also a play on the idea of a music box.
Anita Feldman is one of the show's lead curators. When she first heard about it, she was hesitant.
My first thought was, well, how can you possibly make an exhibition that's so all-encompassing, and how do you make any sense of it?
They decided on 3 themes. The first, the musician depicted in art. The second looks at how art shows social settings with music, things like weddings, festivals, or dancing.
And in the third section, which is one of my favorites, really, it's looking at the concept of synesthesia, or the ability of music and art to correlate so that maybe the sound of a certain instrument evokes certain colors or shapes, forms. And a good example of that is Arthur Dove's Foghorns, where you have, this beautiful, basically abstract composition of blues and grays and purples in these concentric circles, which Arthur Dove meant to convey the sound of foghorns over the sea in the early morning.
There are some big names in the show: Matisse, Jasper Johns, and Salvador Dali. Certain instruments are presented as artworks in and of themselves. Music accompanies each of those. Since the show isn't chronological, art from very different historical moments are placed next to each other. Feldman says this invites intriguing connections, like a tapestry by painter Chuck Close of the composer Philip Glass. It hangs next to a Baroque harpsichord converted into a piano that dates from the 18th century.
And you think, well, how can these two things be exhibited together? What is that about? And actually, it's looking at the status of the musician in art. And of course, something that's so elaborately decorated conveys, the notion that it is something of very high status. And tapestry, of course, goes back to the Middle Ages and, things that were decorating castles.
From high to low status, there is also an entire room devoted to band posters, especially the psychedelic variety, featuring bands like the Grateful Dead.
What surprised me about the work when it all came together in this gallery is actually how sort of cohesive it is.
Associate curator Ariel Plotek says it may seem strange to find them here, but they aren't that different from the posters Toulouse-Lautrec did in the 19th century for the Moulin Rouge.
We're accustomed to thinking of those works as high art, because we regard someone like Toulouse-Lautrec as a greatest artist of the period. And when we see these works, we're really talking about an accomplishment that's no different. It's just that we're less accustomed to seeing them in museums.
The show ends with another interactive piece, this time by a young, up-and-coming artist.
Tristan Parrish is a New York-based artist who created this microtonal sound wall with 1,500 very small speakers that are each playing a distinct note. Each created a different tone. The effect is of a sort of white noise when we stand back from the wall. And as we approach it, though, and move along the wall, we hear the kind of what he describes as a sort of texture of music as the different sounds come in and out of focus.
The microtonal sound wall is an ideal ending for Art of Music. It shows that emerging artists, like their predecessors throughout history, will continue to be influenced by not only what they can see, but also what they can hear. Angela Carone, KPBS News.
Temperatures may be warming up a bit in San Diego, but no heat wave. 70s by the beaches, 80s for the inland valleys. Clearing in the mountains with 60s and 70s there, and back into the 80s for the desert. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.